Paul, the apostle, went through a lot. He saw amazing things. He had visions. He knew Jesus. He started churches all over the place. He wrote so many letters that changed the world. But even Paul, with all his big spiritual experiences, had something that bothered him deeply. He called it a thorn in the flesh. He talked about it in one of his letters, the second letter to the Corinthians. This thorn, whatever it was, really got to him. He prayed about it. He asked God to take it away. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And God said no. This is a big deal. A powerful man of God asking for relief and not getting it. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was this thing that troubled Paul so much? And why did God leave it there? Let's look at what Paul actually wrote. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. He says, "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" That's the passage. That's all Paul tells us about this specific thorn. He doesn't name it. He doesn't describe it in detail. He just says it's there. He says it's a thorn in the flesh and a messenger of Satan to harass me. And he says it was given to him for a reason, to keep me from becoming conceited. This lack of detail is why people have been guessing about the thorn for centuries. Everyone wants to know, was it a physical sickness? Was it a person? Was it a spiritual attack? The Bible doesn't spell it out for us, and that's probably on purpose. But we'll get to why that might be important later. For now, let's just think about what it could have been. Many people think it was some kind of physical problem, a chronic illness that Paul dealt with all the time. He traveled so much, enduring so many hardships, shipwrecks, beatings, hunger, sleepless nights. It's not hard to imagine him having some persistent physical ailment. One popular idea is that he had bad eyesight. In his letter to the Galatians, he talks about them being so kind they would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. That's a strange thing to say unless there was something wrong with his eyes. And later in that same letter, he writes, "See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand." Some people take this to mean he had trouble seeing clearly and had to write big. Maybe he had a severe eye infection or some kind of chronic eye disease. Imagine trying to preach and write and travel with constant eye pain or blurry vision. That would certainly be a thorn. Another guess is malaria. The regions Paul traveled in, especially the coastal areas, were known for malaria. It's a debilitating disease causing recurrent fevers, chills, headaches, and extreme weakness. It comes and goes, but when it hits, it can lay a person low for days. This could explain why Paul sometimes felt weak or unimpressive in person, as some of his critics claimed. Imagine having a massive fever come on just when you're supposed to preach an important sermon or defend yourself against false teachers. Some scholars have suggested epilepsy. In ancient times, seizures were often misunderstood. People might have thought it was a curse or demonic possession. Paul's visions, his dramatic conversion experience on the road to Damascus, some have tried to link these to epileptic phenomena, though that's a very speculative and less common idea now. But if he did suffer from seizures, that would definitely be a thorn that would cause embarrassment and weakness in a public figure like an apostle. It would make people question his authority. Then there's the idea of chronic headaches, like severe migraines. Anyone who suffers from migraines knows how completely crippling they can be. A constant throbbing pain, sensitivity to light and sound, nausea, it can make any activity impossible. Paul was constantly under pressure, traveling, teaching, debating. Chronic migraines would be a profound trial. Or maybe it was something simpler, like a speech impediment. In 2 Corinthians 10:10, Paul's opponents say, "His letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech of no account." This tells us that some people found Paul to be not very impressive when he spoke in person. His preaching might not have been as eloquent or powerful as his writing. If he had a stammer or some other speech difficulty, that would be a very frustrating thorn for someone whose main job was to communicate the gospel. He had these incredible revelations, but maybe struggled to express them verbally in a way that impressed people. So a physical ailment is a strong contender. It fits the idea of flesh and something that could harass him and make him feel weak. But what about the part where he says a messenger of Satan? This makes some people think it wasn't just a physical problem, but something more directly from the spiritual realm. Could it be a specific demon constantly attacking him? This is a possibility given the language. But how would a demon harass him? Would it be through temptations or through causing physical pain? This gets a bit murky. Most people think if it's a messenger of Satan, it's something that causes the distress rather than being the distress itself. This leads to another common theory that the thorn was not an illness, but a person or a group of people. Specifically, the false apostles, or super apostles, who constantly hounded Paul, undermining his authority and corrupting his churches. Paul writes a lot about these people in 2 Corinthians. They challenged his apostleship, they questioned his motives, they spread lies about him. They boasted about their own spiritual achievements and looked down on Paul. Imagine dedicating your life to planting churches, only to have these clever, persuasive people come in right behind you and tear down everything you built. They attacked his character, his preaching, his very legitimacy. This would be incredibly painful, frustrating, and humiliating. It would certainly harass him and keep him from getting conceited. It would make him feel weak and vulnerable. These people could easily be seen as messengers of Satan, doing Satan's work by disrupting God's kingdom. This idea fits Paul's context well. He was constantly dealing with opposition, both from Jewish leaders and from false teachers within the Christian movement. The struggles he describes in 2 Corinthians are often about these very people. Their constant criticism and opposition could be the thorn that kept him grounded. Then, there's the idea that the thorn was an ongoing struggle with sin or temptation. Paul writes in Romans 7 about the inner struggle he faces. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Some wonder if his thorn was a particularly persistent temptation or a weakness in his character that he could never quite overcome. However, the context of 2 Corinthians 12 seems to point more to an external affliction or a physical one, given that it was given to him in the flesh and was meant to keep him from becoming conceited because of his revelations, not his sinfulness. If it were a struggle with sin, the answer, my grace is sufficient, would still apply, but the specific wording to keep me from becoming conceited suggests something that humbles him from an outside force rather than an internal moral failing. So, we have these main categories. 1, a physical ailment, bad eyesight, malaria, epilepsy, migraines, a speech impediment. This Paul had so many profound spiritual experiences. He was caught up to the third heaven and heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. This was an incredible, maybe unique privilege. It would be very easy for someone with such experiences to become proud, to think they were better than everyone else. God knew this. God knew Paul's heart, and he knew Paul's weaknesses, so he allowed this thorn to remain. It was a divine counterbalance. This is the key part of the passage, even more important than figuring out the exact nature of the thorn. The purpose of the thorn. It was to keep me from becoming conceited, and it was allowed by God. Even though Paul calls it a messenger of Satan, God still permitted it and used it for his good purposes. This is a profound theological point. God can use even the devil's attacks to achieve his will. So Paul prayed for relief 3 times. That's a specific number, implying persistent, earnest prayer. He wasn't just casually wishing it away. He genuinely wanted it gone. And God's answer was not, I will take it away. God's answer was, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This is one of the most comforting and challenging statements in the Bible. My grace is sufficient. It means you have what you need. My favor, my help, my strength, it's enough. You don't need this thorn removed to serve me, or to be whole, or to be loved. And then, my power is made perfect in weakness. This turns everything upside down. We usually think power comes from strength, from having it all together, from being healthy, smart, rich, influential. But God says no. His power shines brightest when we are weak, when we are at our lowest, when we have nothing left, when we can't do it ourselves. That's when God steps in and does his greatest work through us. Our weakness creates the space for his power to operate without competition. If Paul were perfectly strong and healthy and eloquent and had no challengers, he might have taken credit for his successes. But with the thorn, he knew he couldn't. He had to rely on God. This is why Paul then says he will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses. That's a radical statement. Who boasts about their weaknesses? We hide our weaknesses. We try to overcome them. We feel ashamed of them. But Paul says he will gladly boast about them, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He understood that his weaknesses were not obstacles to God's work, but pathways for God's power. And so he becomes content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. That's a lot of difficult things to be content with, but he embraces them because he knows that when I am weak, then I am strong. This isn't some masochistic desire for suffering. It's a profound spiritual insight. God's strength is found in our surrender to him, especially in our moments of greatest need and vulnerability. Now, back to the mystery of the thorn's identity. Why didn't Paul just tell us what it was? Why leave it so vague? I think this is where the ambiguity becomes a huge gift to us. If Paul had said, my thorn in the flesh was chronic malaria, then everyone else with a different struggle might think, well, that's not my problem. My thorn is different. Maybe God's grace isn't sufficient for my thorn. Or, I don't have malaria, so this passage doesn't really apply to me. But because Paul leaves it unnamed, it becomes universal. Everyone has a thorn in the flesh. Maybe not a literal thorn, but something that bothers us, something that causes us pain or frustration, something that limits us, something we desperately wish God would take away. Your thorn might be a chronic illness, a physical pain that never goes away. It might be a mental health struggle, like anxiety or depression, that constantly whispers doubts in your ear. It might be a difficult family member, someone who always seems to cause conflict or bring you down. It might be a job situation that is draining and unfulfilling. It might be a financial struggle that never lets up. It might be a persistent temptation or a character flaw you keep battling. It might be the constant criticism or opposition from people who dislike you or what you stand for. It could be a disability, a limitation you face every day. Whatever your thorn is, the message to Paul is the message to you. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This makes Paul's experience deeply relatable. We all know what it's like to plead with God for something to change, something to be taken away. We all know what it's like to feel weak, frustrated, or limited. And we all need to hear that God's grace is enough, right where we are with whatever we are facing. The identity of Paul's thorn doesn't matter as much as the lessons we learn from it. One big lesson is that suffering is not a sign of God's disapproval. Paul was a devoted follower of Jesus, an apostle used mightily by God. Yet, he suffered. God allowed it. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if we just pray hard enough or have enough faith, all our problems will disappear. But Paul's story shows us that sometimes God's answer is not to remove the problem, but to give us the strength to live with it, and even to thrive in spite of it. He allows thorns for our good, to keep us humble, to make us rely on Him more, and to show His power through our weakness. Another lesson is about humility. Paul had these incredible spiritual experiences. He saw things, heard things, that most people never will. It would have been so easy for him to become prideful. The thorn was a constant reminder that he was still human, still dependent on God. Humility is a vital trait for anyone serving God. Pride can quickly destroy ministry and relationships. God protects us from pride, sometimes in painful ways, and a huge lesson is about the sufficiency of God's grace. We often feel like we need to be perfect or strong or have everything figured out before God can use us. But God says no. He uses us in our brokenness, in our messiness, in our limitations. His grace covers our deficiencies. His power shines through our cracks. We don't need to be strong for God to work. We just need to be available. Think about what it means to be content with weaknesses. That's not a natural human impulse. We want to fix our weaknesses, hide them, overcome them. But Paul found peace and even joy in his weaknesses, because they were the very places where Christ's power rested upon him. This challenges us to look at our own struggles not as handicaps, but as potential arenas for God's glory. So, how does this apply to us today? First, identify your own thorn. What is that one thing or those few things that constantly harass you, that you wish God would just take away? Be honest with yourself about it. Second, be like Paul and pray about it. It's good to ask God for relief. It's okay to pour out your heart and tell Him you don't like it. He already knows, but He wants you to talk to Him. Paul prayed 3 times. Don't give up after one prayer. Third, listen for God's answer. Sometimes He will take the thorn away. He does heal, He does change circumstances, but sometimes His answer might be what He told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. And if that's the answer, then we need to learn to accept it. Accepting it doesn't mean you stop trying to manage the thorn. If it's a physical illness, you still see doctors and take medicine. If it's a difficult person, you still set boundaries or pray for them. If it's a financial struggle, you still work hard and manage your resources. But acceptance means you stop railing against God for allowing it. You stop asking, why me? You start asking, what can I learn from this? And how can God use this? It means shifting your perspective. Instead of seeing your thorn as a barrier, see it as a platform for God's power to be displayed. It's a platform for you to experience His grace in a deeper way. This isn't easy, of course. Embracing weakness goes against our natural instincts. We live in a world that values strength, independence, and success. But the Christian life, as Paul models it, often finds its greatest strength in dependence on God, especially in our moments of greatest vulnerability. Paul's story of the thorn in the flesh is a powerful reminder that following Jesus doesn't mean a life free from pain or struggle. In fact, it often means encountering more of it. But it also means that in the midst of that pain and struggle, God is present. His grace is more than enough. His power is revealed in ways we could never imagine when we are strong. So, whether Paul's thorn was a crushing headache, a frustrating speech impediment, blinding eye pain, or the constant sting of unfaithful church members, the specific detail doesn't change the main point. The point is not what it was, but how God responded and how Paul responded to God. His thorn was a reminder, a constant check, to keep him from pride. It was a tool in God's hand, even if delivered by a messenger of Satan. And it was the very thing that allowed Paul to say, with full conviction, for the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is a profound truth. Our weaknesses are not liabilities for God. They are opportunities. They are the empty spaces that God fills with his strength. They are the canvases on which he paints his masterpiece of grace. The next time you feel overwhelmed by your own thorn, whatever it may be, remember Paul. Remember his prayer. Remember God's answer. And remember that the same grace that was sufficient for Paul is sufficient for you. Well, God's power is waiting to be made perfect in your weakness too. It's a hard truth, but a beautiful one.